Hi, this is Ramya Ravindran and welcome back to my channel Infinity for UPSC. So today we are going to deal with the 6th chapter, new questions and ideas. Now let's revise the timeline. Vedic period, it began about 3500 years ago, that is 1500 BC onwards. Then we saw the megalithic culture which began about 3000 years ago, that is 1000 BC onwards. Inamgaon, this was a village which was occupied between 3600 and 2700 years ago, that is 1600 BC to 700 BC. Then we saw about later Vedic period which began about 3000 years ago, that is 1000 BC onwards. Then we saw about the system of Janpadas which began in the later Vedic period, that is 3000 years ago, which means 1000 BC onwards. Then Janpadas developed into Mahajanpadas about 2500 years ago, which means 500 BC onwards. Now in this chapter we are going to cover the Buddhism, Jainism and Upanishads which developed in the 6th century BC. Now these were the reaction to the Mahajanpadas or the culture that existed in the Mahajanpadas. Now by this time we had seen that taxation had begun, that means kings were imposing taxes on the general public. The caste system had become very rigid. The situation of women and Shudras in the society were very bad. Then there was untouchability which was prevailing in the society. So all in all, the situation was very bad and very chaotic. And in history, we have always seen that whenever the situation becomes very chaotic, something revolutionary happens. Either political revolution or intellectual revolution. Now these are intellectual revolutions. So we will see what is happening in Buddhism, Jainism and Upanishads in this chapter. Now you will have to note one more thing, that is 500 BC onwards mean 6th century BC. Okay, 501 BC to 599 BC is equal to 6th century. So Mahajanpad, Buddhism, Jainism and Upanishads, all these events are taking place in the 6th century BC. The story of the Buddha. Now why are they prefixing Buddha with the? It is because Buddha is not a name, it is a title. So the Buddha means the wise one. And the actual name of Buddha is Siddhartha or Gautam. So Gautam Buddha, he was the founder of Buddhism and he was born about 2500 years ago. So note this period, 2500 years ago. Now I have already explained you that rapid changes were taking place in the lives of people both in cities as well as in villages. And during this time many thinkers emerged and they wanted to find out the true meaning of life. They were fed up of the economic and the societal degradation that was happening and they wanted to find out the true meaning of life. That is, what is it that they want to achieve in this life and what is the true purpose of their life. And one such thinker was Buddha. And Buddha, he belonged to Sankya Gana and he was a Kshatriya. So Buddha, Sankya Gana, Kshatriya. When Buddha was very young, that is when he was 29 years old, he left his home in search of knowledge. After leaving his home, he was wandering for several years, meeting and holding discussions with other thinkers, but nothing substantial emerged or he did not learn anything substantial. So finally, he decided to meditate and achieve the self-realization on his own. And he got the enlightenment under a peepal tree at Bodh Gaya in Bihar. So this place also becomes very important, Bodh Gaya in Bihar, the place of enlightenment of Buddha. Then he went to Sarnath, which is near Varanasi, where he taught for the first time. So first preaching was given in Sarnath, which is near Varanasi. So what all things are important here? Buddha is a title which means the wise one. His name is Siddhartha or Gautam, founder of Buddhism 2500 years ago. He belonged to Sankya Gana. He was a Kshatriya. He got his enlightenment under a peepal tree at Bodh Gaya in Bihar. His first preaching or the first sermon was in Sarnath near Varanasi. The stupa at Sarnath. What is the importance of Sarnath? This is the place where Buddha gave his first teaching. And that is why a stupa has been built in this place. He spent the rest of his life teaching people and he did this till he passed away at Kushinara. So another important place, Kushinara is the place where he gave up his physical body. So Kushinara, place of his death. Now what is the philosophy of Buddhism? Buddha says that life is full of suffering and that is because of the desires. And these desires are unfulfilled. That means how much ever you try to fulfill your desires, you have more and more desires and you want to achieve more and more things. And that is the reason the desires are unending. and such unending desires are termed as thirst or tanha. So tanha is nothing but desires, and the only way to escape this is following moderation, that is not overdoing and not underdoing anything. He also taught people to be kind and to respect lives of others, including animals. He believed that karma affects us both in this life and the next life. So what does this mean? Buddha believed in karma and Buddha believed in rebirth. So this statement is very important. Buddha believed in karma and in the concept of rebirth. Buddha taught in the language of the ordinary people, which is Prakrit. The language called Sanskrit, it was not known to everybody, and that is the reason Buddha chose a local language, which is Prakrit. He also encouraged people to think for themselves rather than to simply accept what he had said. So he had encouraged people to think for themselves. So what all are important here? Kushinara is the place where he gave his physical body. Tanha is nothing but the unending desires, and the only way to escape this is following moderation. He believed in karma, he believed in rebirth, he taught in Prakrit. A Buddhist text tells us, just as the waters of rivers lose their names and separateness when they join the ocean, so are varna, ranks and families forgotten when the followers of Buddha join the order of monks. So that means all these things are not considered or not given importance in Buddhism. That means people belonging to any varna, any class, any family can join Buddhism. The story of Kisagothami. Now the only thing that you need to remember about this story is it is related to Buddhism and Buddha. Now this story suggests that this woman had lost her child and she was grieving the death of her child. And since she was not able to accept the death of her child, she was carrying the child with her and she was asking for help and asking people to bring him back to life. Now when a person saw this, he took this woman to Buddha. And Buddha said he will bring back the child to life, but she will have to bring some mustard seeds from a family where nobody has died. So she went from door to door to each and every family, to each and every house, but she couldn't find a single family or a single house where nobody has died. So this is a teaching that Buddha wanted to give to this woman, that death is something which is to be accepted and death is going to be an inevitable event in one's life. 6 schools of Indian philosophy. Now the root of Indian philosophy is nothing but the Vedas. So it is the Vedas which is the essence of Indian philosophy. Now these Vedas, they were written in Sanskrit, and that too in old Sanskrit. We had already seen that the Sanskrit that we use right now and the Sanskrit which was used in the Vedic period, both are different. Moreover, the Vedas were in the form of hymns, poems and in dialogues. So that means these are not very easy to understand. And more than that, Vedas use lot of metaphors. That is, the conversation is not direct. So that means you will have to decode the metaphor to understand what Veda is trying to tell you. So that is the reason these schools developed. So the 6 schools are nothing but Vaisheshika, Nyaya, Sankhya, Yoga, Purva Mimamsa, Vedanta or Uttar Mimamsa. And these are the respective people who have found these schools. So Vaisheshika is by sage Konark, Nyaya by sage Gautam, Sankhya by Kapila, Yoga Patanjali, Purva Mimamsa Jaimini, Vedanta or Uttar Mimamsa by Vyasa. So you will have to remember these schools and the respective founders. These are very important. So I will give you a gist of all these 6 schools of philosophies. It is not given in your 6th standard NCERT, but it is required for your UPSC syllabus. So a gist is given here, but later I will be explaining all these things in detail. So what is Vaisheshika? It is understanding the reality of universe through science and especially through physics. What is Nyaya? It is obtaining direct knowledge. That is, you use your own 5 senses, which is called as Pratyaksha Praman. That is direct knowledge. But Anuman and Shabda Praman are also considered. What is Anuman? If you know that A is equal to B and B is equal to C, then you can safely infer that A is equal to C. So that is the meaning of Anuman. What is Shabda Praman? Shabda Praman in the sense a statement which is given by an expert, that statement can be considered and that statement can be used as a source of knowledge. So that is the meaning of Shabda Praman. So that means in Nyaya we use Pratyaksha Praman, Anuman and Shabda Praman. What is Sankya philosophy? It explains the concept of Purush and Prakriti. That means spirit and nature. It is nothing but the merging of the Prakriti with the Purush. That is the Kundalini with the Sahasra. And that is the essence of your Sankhya philosophy. What is Purva Mimamsa? It emphasizes on Karma Kanda, that is ritual. So you are expected to do sacrifices or yajnas so that you can get material and spiritual well-being. So that is the focus of Purva Mimamsa. Uttar Mimamsa or Vedanta. Now many students think that Vedanta means end of Vedas. But that is not true. Vedanta means after reading all the Vedas, what is the essence that you get at the end of it. So that is the meaning of Vedanta. It is Vedas simplified. Now we will see one more term, and that is called Upanishad. So students get confused between Vedanta and Upanishad, and they feel that these two are two different things. But they are not two different things. Upanishads are nothing but the teachings of Vedanta. Upanishads are the means through which Vedanta is taught. Vedanta is the essence of Vedas, and Vedanta is taught through Upanishads. So Upanishads and Vedanta both are same. So what is said in this philosophy? It says that everything that we see around is Maya and Brahman is the only reality. Basically, it is trying to say that you, I, and everything that we see around are Brahmans, and we are different forms and different versions of Brahmans. So nothing exists but Brahman. Next is Upanishads. I have already told you what these Upanishads are. So while Buddha was preaching, there were several other thinkers who were trying to find answers to some difficult questions. And they felt that even after death, there was something which lasted. That is, something permanent existed in this universe. And that something permanent was called as the Atman or the individual self, and the Brahman or the universal soul. And they also believed that this Atman and this Brahman, they are one and the same. So all these knowledge, these findings and these answers, these were recorded in the Upanishads. And Upanishad is a later Vedic text. Now this term Upanishad, this literally means approaching and sitting near. So the students sit near the teachers and they have conversations, and it is out of these conversations that they get answers to such difficult questions. Often ideas were presented through simple dialogues. See, the Vedas that we have read about, those Vedas are written in a different form of Sanskrit. And moreover, the Vedas, they are in the form of hymns, they are in the form of poems, and a lot of metaphorical language is used. And the one who is reading it will have to decode these metaphors in order to understand what those sages were trying to tell. So that means it becomes difficult at times. And that is the reason these thinkers decided that the Vedanta or the Upanishads, these would be in simple dialogues, so that there is no difficulty or there is no confusion and everybody can understand the essence of Vedas. Now there were many thinkers and most were men, especially Brahmins and Rajas. But there were women thinkers as well, and Gargi is one such example, and she had participated in debates which were held in royal courts. So that means she was recognized and she was respected. Poor people rarely took part in these discussions. Now they are using the word rarely. That means if you get a statement which says that poor people could not take part in these discussions, that statement is a wrong statement, because they could take part but only few people decided to take part. Example is Satyakama Jabala. He was the son of a slave woman called as Jabali, and this Satyakama Jabala, he was accepted as a student by a Brahmin teacher called as Gautama. Now this Gautama is sage Gautama and not Gautam Buddha. So Gautama accepted Satyakama Jabala as his student. Many of the ideas of Upanishads were later developed by famous thinkers like Shankaracharya. Now the first Shankaracharya is to be referred as Adi Shankaracharya and not just Shankaracharya, because the later Acharyas, they were also referred to as Shankaracharyas. So this is Adi Shankaracharya. So what all are important here? Men, Brahmins, Rajas, women and poor people. Everybody could participate. Then Satyakama Jabala, he was the son of a slave woman called as Jabali. His teacher is sage Gautama. Then many of the ideas of Upanishads were developed by Adi Shankaracharya. Next, the Wise Beggar. So this story is taken from Chandogya Upanishad and it is in the form of dialogue, and there are three people in this story. Shaunaka and Abhipratarin, these are sages and a beggar. So these people, they were having food, and meanwhile a beggar approached them and he asked for food. But these people refused, saying that they cannot spare anything for him. So that is when the beggar said that if you worship the universal soul, that means you believe in universal soul and you believe that everything that we see around is nothing but Brahman. So that means even I am Brahman. And if you are refusing food to me, that means you are refusing food to the Brahman. So that is when these sages understood their mistake and they shared their food with this beggar. So what is important here? This story is in the form of dialogue. It is taken from Chandogya Upanishad. The three personalities are Shaunaka, Abhipratarin and beggar, and this story is about universal soul or Brahman. Next is the system of ashramas. The system was developed by Brahmins and it was developed around the same time. That is the system of ashramas, Buddhism, Jainism, the 6 schools of philosophies, all these were developed around the same time. Now what does system of ashramas mean? This is nothing but the 4 stages of life. That is Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha and Sannyas. So what is Brahmacharya? Brahmacharya basically means celibacy. That is, Brahmins, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, they were expected to lead simple lives and study Vedas. And this is followed for the first 25 years of your life. Next is Grihas. That is, they had to marry and live as a householder. Third is Vanaprastha. They will have to live in the forest and meditate. That is, they are preparing to become a sannyasi. Finally, the 4th stage is sannyasi. That is, you give up everything and you become sannyasi. So this is up to 25 years. This is 25 to 50, 50 to 75 and 75 to 100. Now what is the purpose of developing the system of ashramas? These ashramas made sure that everybody will spend at least some part of their lives in meditation. Everybody except Shudras. So it was for Brahmins, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas but not for Shudras. Generally, women were not allowed to study Vedas, but they had to follow the ashramas chosen by their husband. That is, if the husband is in the grihastha stage, even the wife is in the grihastha stage. Then when the husband enters the vanaprastha stage, even the wife enters this stage. Then when he takes up the sannyasi stage, even the wife is supposed to take up this stage. So what is important here? There are 4 stages of life. And the human lifetime is equally divided into these 4 stages. First 25 years, then next 25, next 25 and the final 25. Brahmacharya is celibacy and study of Vedas. Grihastha is householder. This is meditation in forest and the ultimate detachment. Brahmins, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas can follow the system. Shudras cannot follow the system. Women are not allowed to study the Vedas, but they will have to follow the ashramas chosen by their husbands. Next is about Panini. He had prepared grammar for Sanskrit by arranging the vowels and consonants. We know that in English language, A, E, I, O, U are the vowels and the remaining are the consonants. So likewise, even in Sanskrit, there are vowels and consonants and these were arranged by Panini. And he had also created formulas which were the rules of the language. And he had developed around 3000 such formulas. So what is to be remembered here? Panini is a scholar who had prepared grammar for Sanskrit. Next is about Jainism. The word Jaina comes from the term Jina, which means conqueror. So what is conquered here? A person who could conquer his own mind is called as Jina or a Jaina. Now 2500 years ago, when Buddha was spreading Buddhism, around that same time, the last and the 24th Tirthankara, that is Vardhaman Mahavira, was also spreading his message. So that means Buddha and Mahavira both are contemporaries of each other. Mahavira was a Kshatriya prince of the Licchavis. We had seen that Buddha was also a Kshatriya. Mahavira was part of the Vajji Sangha and Buddha belonged to Sankya Gana. So that is Sankya Gana, this is Vajji Sangha. At the age of 30, Mahavira left his home and went to live in a forest. Now the age of Buddha when he had left his home is not given in your NCERT, but it is 29 years. So almost at the same time, 29 and 30. Mahavira attained enlightenment after 12 years. That is at the age of 42, Mahavira attained enlightenment. And Buddha, it is at the age of 35. So what is important here? Jina means conqueror. Vardhaman Mahavira existed 2500 years ago. He was the last and the 24th Tirthankara. He was a Kshatriya prince of the Lichavis and belonged to Vajji Sangh. He left home at the age of 30. He got enlightenment at the age of 42. Mahavira and his followers used Prakrit. We are seeing that Buddha had also used Prakrit. So Buddhism and Jainism both used Prakrit to spread their messages. There were several forms of Prakrit and it was named after the regions in which they were used. Example, Prakrit spoken in Magad is called as Magadhi. So Magadhi is also a form of Prakrit language. Now what does Jainism say? Jainism says that men and women who wish to know the truth, they must leave their homes. And they will have to lead a very simple lives by begging their food. Now why were they supposed to beg their food? Because they will have to forego their ego. Detaching ego is the first step towards the infinite Brahman, and that is the reason they were asked to beg for their food. Now there are 5 principles or 5 rules which are to be followed in Jainism, and these are to be followed very strictly. First is ahimsa, which means not hurting and not killing living beings. Now living beings include humans, animals, pests and even small microbes. And that is the reason we say that the rules of Jainism are very strict. Second is absolute honesty. Third is not to steal. Fourth is celibacy. That is Brahmacharya. Fifth is give up everything including your own clothes. Now this fifth rule makes Jainism very difficult to follow. So what are the 5 principles? Ahimsa, honesty, not to steal, celibacy and give up everything. So as I said, it was very difficult for most of the people to follow these strict rules, but still there were thousands of people who followed this path, and there were several others who wanted to follow this path but they could not follow, and they chose to support the people who followed this path. So that is the way they were contributing to Jainism. Jainism was supported mainly by traders, and farmers found it very difficult to follow the rules because they had to kill the insects to protect their crops. These farmers, they were not allowed to use the insecticide or the pesticide because that is going to kill the small pest, and even that was not allowed in Jainism. So that is the reason these people were reluctant to join Jainism. Over hundreds of years, Jainism spread to North India, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. So note these places: North India, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. Initially, the teachings of Mahavira and his followers were transmitted orally, and this was done for several centuries, but about 1500 years ago, it was written down at Vallabhi in Gujarat. So this place becomes very important. The teachings of Mahavira and his followers were written down at Vallabhi in Gujarat about 1500 years ago. So what all are important here? Traders joined in large numbers, and places are North India, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, and it was written down at Vallabhi in Gujarat about 1500 years ago. Next is Sangha. We had seen that both Mahavira and Buddha, they had left their respective homes in order to achieve enlightenment. So that means they believed that only those who left their homes could gain true knowledge or enlightenment. So a place was arranged for all such people, and the group was called as Sangha. Sangha means the association of all those people who had left their homes. The rules made for Buddhist Sangha were written down in a book called as Vinay Pitak. So when you're staying in a group, you're supposed to follow some rules, and those rules were written down in a book called as Vinay Pitak. And this Vinay Pitak, this is one of the 3 Pitakas. 3 Pitakas are not mentioned in this chapter, but there are 3 Pitakas, and one is Vinay Pitak, other is Sutta Pitak, and third is Abhidham Pitak. Vinay Pitak has got the rules, Sutta Pitak has got the sutras of the Buddhism, and Abhidham Pitak has got the doctrine or the philosophy of the Buddhism. And through Vinay Pitaka, we get to know that there were separate branches for men and women. That means even women could join the Buddhist Sanghas. However, some category of people had to take the permissions. Example, children had to take the permission of their parents, slaves from masters, and the people who worked for king had to take the permission of the king, debtors from creditors, and women had to take permission from their husbands. So what is important here? Sangha is the association of those who left their homes, and Vinay Pitak has got the rules made for the Buddhist Sanghas. Separate branches were there for men and women, and certain category of people had to take permissions before joining Sangha. The people who joined the Sangha, they led very simple lives. They meditated for most of the time. They went to cities and villages to beg for food during fixed hours. We had already seen that these people were supposed to beg for their food, and that is the reason they are called as bhikkhus or bhikkhunis. Bhikkhus in Prakrit mean renouncer. That means a person who has renounced everything is called as bhikkhus in Prakrit. Now, these people who had joined the Sangha, apart from meditating, they spent their time in teaching others. They also held meetings to settle any quarrels that took place in the Sangha. Now, if you get this statement, do not think that this is a wrong statement. It is a correct statement. Because students might assume that there is no scope for quarrels in Sangha, and that's why this statement must be false. But the statement is a correct statement. Those who joined the Sangha included Brahmins, Kshatriyas, merchants, laborers, barbers, courtesans, and slaves. So that means everybody could join the Sangha, but certain category of people had to take permissions. Many of the people who had joined the Sangha had written down the teachings of Buddha, and some had even composed poems describing their life in the Sangha. So what is important here? Bhikkhus and bhikkhunis mean renouncer in Prakrit, and they had meetings to settle down quarrels. Everybody could join, but some had to take permissions, and the followers had written down about the teachings of Buddha. Next is monasteries. In the previous slide, we had seen Sangha. Sangha means association of the people who had left their homes. Now monasteries mean the place where these people stay. So that is the difference between Sangha and monasteries. Now what was the necessity of monasteries? The Jaina and Buddhist monks, they travel from place to place throughout the year teaching people except for rainy season. So this is very important. The Jaina and Buddhist monks, they do not travel during the rainy season. That is, they do not teach during the rainy season. So during such time, that is during the rainy season, their supporters built temporary shelters or they lived in the natural caves in hilly areas. But as time went by, these monks felt that they need permanent shelters, and that is the reason these monasteries were built. And these monasteries are called as viharas. We had earlier seen a term called as chaityas in the 5th chapter, and chaityas mean local shrines. So chaityas are shrines and viharas are monasteries. That is the place where these people stayed. The earliest viharas which were made were of wood. But later they started building monasteries using brick as well. And some monasteries were dug out in hills, especially in the western India. So that means these are not natural caves, these are carved out or hollowed out. Now the land where these viharas were built, that is these monasteries were built, were often donated by rich merchants or landowners or the king. And the local people, they contributed by giving food, clothing and medicines. And in return, the monks taught these people. Over the centuries, Buddhism spread to many parts of the world. We know that in Southeast Asia, Buddhism has spread to a great extent. So what is important here? They travel throughout the year except during the rainy season. Viharas are permanent shelters or monasteries or place of residence. Chaityas, local shrines. Karle cave in Maharashtra. So this is the example of a cave hollowed out in the hills. That is, this is not a natural cave. So example is Karle cave in Maharashtra. We had seen that such caves were dug out in western India. So Maharashtra is in western India. So this is the example. Elsewhere, that is 2500 years ago, when Buddhism, Jainism, Upanishads, schools of philosophies and ashrams, when all these things were being developed in India, what was happening in Iran? Zoroaster was an Iranian prophet. His teachings are contained in a book called as Avesta. So Zoroaster is a prophet and Avesta is a religious book. The language of the Avesta and the practices which are described in Avesta are very similar to those of Vedas. We already know that Vedas are the root culture of many other cultures or many other religions. The basic teaching of Zoroaster are contained in the maxim, good thoughts, good words and good deeds. So similar to what we have, that is Manasa, Vacha and Karmana. Here is a verse from Zend Avesta. Lord, please grant us strength so that one shall create peace and tranquility. For more than 1000 years, this was a major religion in Iran. But later, some of these people migrated from Iran and they settled down in coastal towns of Gujarat and Maharashtra. And these people, that is Zoroastrians, these are the ancestors of today's Parsis. So what is important here? Zoroaster was an Iranian prophet, and many of the people who had followed this culture, they had migrated from Iran and they had settled down in Gujarat and Maharashtra. And these people were the ancestors of today's Parsis. So where is Iran? This is Iran in the world map. What are the adjacent countries? Iraq, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan and Pakistan. Once again, Iraq, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan and Pakistan. Then you have Caspian Sea in the north and Persian Gulf in the southwest. So Caspian Sea, Iran and Persian Gulf. Some important dates. So Mahavira, Buddha and Upanishad thinkers, they lived about 2500 years ago. And the contemporary events are the development of Upanishads, the development of 4 ashrams of life by Brahmins, Sanskrit grammar was developed by Panini, Buddhism and Jainism. So that means all these events took place 2500 years ago. Now another important date is writing down of the Jaina text, which is 1500 years ago. So these are 2500 years ago and this is 1500 years ago, and all these are contemporary events. Now let us revise Greece. So Greece, west we had seen Ionian Sea, south Mediterranean Sea and east Aegean Sea. Adjacent countries are Albania, Macedonia, Bulgaria and Turkey. Then the adjacent countries of China are India, Pakistan occupied Kashmir, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Russia, North Korea, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, Bhutan and Nepal. Now let us revise. So this is the timeline. Pause the slide and read it once again if you have forgotten the timeline. The Buddha, this is a title which means the wise one. Siddhartha Gautama was his original name. He was the founder of Buddhism. He was born about 2500 years ago. He belonged to Sankya Gana and he was a Kshatriya. He got his enlightenment under a peepal tree at Bodh Gaya in Bihar. And he gave his first teaching at Sarnath near Varanasi. He gave up his physical body at Kushinara. And according to Buddhism, life is full of suffering and this is because of desires. And never-ending desires are called as tanha. And this tanha, this could be removed by following moderation. That is, not overdoing anything and not underdoing anything. And Buddha, he believed in karma and he believed in rebirth. Buddha taught in the language called as Prakrit. And according to a Buddhist text, Varna, ranks and families, these do not matter once you join Buddhism. The story of Kisagothami. This is about Buddhism and here Buddha teaches Kisagothami about death. That is, death is an inevitable event in one's life. These are the 6 schools of Indian philosophies and these are the respective founders: Vaisheshika, Sage Konad, Nyaya, Gautam, Sankhya, Kapila, Yoga, Patanjali, Purva Mimamsa, Jaimini, Vedanta or Uttar Mimamsa by Vyasa. Vaisheshika, it is understanding universe through science. Nyaya, through direct knowledge, through Pratyaksh Praman, Anuman and Shabda Praman. Sankhya, this is about Purush and Prakriti. Purva Mimamsa, it emphasizes on Karma Kanda or rituals. Uttar Mimamsa or Vedanta, this says that Brahman is the only reality and everything else is just Maya. Yoga, it is preparing the body for the ultimate moment of awakening and it includes physical postures, right food, meditation and discipline in daily routine. Upanishads, Vedanta is taught through Upanishads and Vedanta is nothing but the summary of the Vedas. So in short, Vedas are taught through Upanishads. Upanishads believe in the concept of Atman and the Brahman. Atman is the individual soul, Brahman is the universal soul and they believe that both are one and the same. Upanishad is a later Vedic text and Upanishad literally means approaching and sitting near. That is, you sit near the teacher and have a conversation and learn through that conversation. Most of the Upanishadic thinkers were men, especially Brahmins and Rajas, but women thinkers also existed and Gargi is one such example. And poor people also took part. An example is Satyakama Jabala. He was the son of a slave woman called as Jabali. And Satyakama Jabala, he was accepted as a student by the Brahmin teacher called as Gautam. And one of the most important personality related to Upanishads and Vedanta is Sri Adi Shankaracharya. The Wise Beggar. So this story is taken from Chandogya Upanishad. It has three characters: Shaunaka, Abhipratarin and Beggar, and it is related to the universal soul. The system of ashramas. So this was developed by Brahmins and it has four stages: Brahmacharya, Grihas, Vanaprasth and Sannyasa. So one's lifetime is equally divided into four stages. First 25 Brahmacharya, next 25, next 25 and finally 75 to 100 is Sannyasa. Brahmins, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas were expected to follow this system and Shudras were not allowed to follow this system. And women, they were not allowed to study Vedas, but they were expected to follow the ashramas chosen by their husbands. Panini, he was a scholar who had prepared grammar for Sanskrit. Now coming to Jainism, the word Jaina or Jina means conqueror. That is, one who could conquer his or her mind. Vardhaman Mahavira, who was born about 2500 years ago, was the last and the 24th Tirthankara of the Jainas. He was a Kshatriya prince of the Lichavis and he belonged to Vajji Sangh. He left home at the age of 30. He got enlightenment at the age of 42. And when it comes to Buddha, he left his home at the age of 29 and he got enlightenment at the age of 35. Mahavira and his followers used Prakrit. He believed that one should leave their homes in order to understand the truth. The Jainas had to lead very simple life and they were expected to beg for their food. The 5 rules of Jainism are ahimsa, honesty, not to steal, celibacy and give up everything including their clothes. Jainism was supported mainly by traders and very few farmers joined Jainism. We know the reason. And Jainism spread to different parts of North India, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. It was transmitted orally and finally it was written down at Vallabhi in Gujarat about 1500 years ago. Sangha is an association of all those people who had left their homes. Such an association was required because both Mahavira and Buddha felt that only those people who had left their homes could gain true knowledge. Now the rules which were made for Buddhist Sangha, these were written down in a book called as Vinay Pitaka and this is part of 3 Pitakas. Other 2 Pitakas are Sutta Pitaka and Abhidham Pitaka. Sutta Pitaka has got the sutras related to Buddha and his disciples and Abhidham Pitaka has got the philosophy of Buddhism. Then there were separate branches for men and women, that means even women were included in the Sangha. Everybody could join the Sangha but these categories had to take permissions. Example, children, slaves, those who worked for king, debtors and women. The monks went to cities and villages to beg for food during fixed hours. They were also called as bhikkhus and bhikkhus is a Prakrit word which means renouncer. The monks also held meetings to settle quarrels. Brahmins, Kshatriyas, merchants, laborers, barbers, courtesans and slaves, everybody could join the Sangha. The Jaina and Buddhist monks, they used to travel throughout the year to teach others except during the rainy season. And during the rainy season, they used to stay in monasteries. But earlier they used to stay in temporary shelters. But later these monasteries were developed and we have got 2 terms. One is viharas and other one is chaityas. Viharas are the name given to the permanent shelters or the monasteries and chaityas are local shrines. So note the difference, viharas and chaityas. Then some of the viharas, they were dug out in hills. That is, these caves did not exist naturally, but these were dug out specially for these monks. And such caves existed in Western India. One such example is Karle Caves in Maharashtra. So this is Karle Caves, Maharashtra. Then we also saw that in Iran, Zoroaster was an Iranian prophet, Avesta was a religious book, and the language and the practices which were described in Avesta were very similar to Vedas. Then many of these people had migrated from Iran and had settled down in coastal towns of Gujarat and Maharashtra. These people are the ancestors of today's Parsis. Then this is the map of Iran. You have got Iraq, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan and Pakistan as the adjacent countries. So these countries share land boundary with Iran. Then you have got Caspian Sea to its north and Persian Gulf is there in the southwest of Iran. So once again, Iraq, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan and Pakistan. Then Caspian Sea in the north, Persian Gulf in the southwest. Then these are the important dates. Upanishad thinkers, Mahavira and Buddha, the timeline is 2500 years ago and all these are contemporary events. That is development of Upanishads, 4 ashrams of life, grammar for Sanskrit, Buddhism and Jainism. Then writing down of Jaina texts, this happened 1500 years ago. So all these are 2500 years ago and this is 1500 years ago. Then we had also revised the map of Greece. You have got Ionian Sea to the west, Aegean Sea to the east and Mediterranean Sea to the south. And the countries sharing land boundary with Greece are Albania, Macedonia, Bulgaria and Turkey. Then the countries sharing land boundary with China are India, Pakistan occupied Kashmir, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Russia, North Korea, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, Bhutan and Nepal. So that's all from my side for this video. Please like, share and subscribe this channel, and I'll be back with the next video very soon. Thank you so much.